The final plugin in our mastering chain, if you like, is a limiter, which I've got down here, and I'm using Recomp to act as a limiter. If you listen to, let's go to our loudest part of our track again, and take a look at what we've got. We're just about at the loudest we can go, but we could squeeze a little bit more volume out of it. Now, we could increase the volume of our master channel until we got to 0 dB, but we could also use a limiter to just push things that little bit harder. Now, the loudness wars that we spoke about are kind of responsible for a losing of clarity and life from music over the years, because limiting's been used in excess to make tracks as loud as they could possibly be without so much thought behind how alive they sound. And as we've spoken about, it's best not to try and compete purely on a loudness basis with other tracks. It's better to try and find, I guess, a match for character and tone, because you're just not going to find the same amount of loudness from $1 million track. But that said, let's listen to what happens when we turn this mastering limiter on. We suddenly get a lot more loudness, and it's a lot more loudness than that 1.5-ish decibels would have given us by turning up the master. And it's because, as you can see, we're actually chopping off a couple of decibels of the top peaks of the track and just squeezing them in a bit. And that reining them in gives us just a bit more volume to play with without taking away anything from the track. Now, there are a few reasons, there are a few ways in which we've got as much transparency as we can get out of this limiter, and let's go through them. First of all, I've got pre-compression all the way up to maybe even an excessive 250 milliseconds. Pre-compression is also known as look-ahead compression, and it literally looks ahead in the mix to find out when there's going to be a point at which the compressor needs to kick in. And this makes it smoother and more transparent for things like the knee size and the attack time. Now, without breaking the laws of physics, pre-compression, look-ahead compression would be impossible. So what this does is it actually adds latency to our signal. If you have any composition to do or any other mixing to do, you're going to notice this extra latency in exactly the same way as you would notice the latency from finite impulse response in our multiband compressor. But what we are really concerned with is smoothness and transparency at this point. So it doesn't make any difference probably to go above, around 50 odd milliseconds, but if we jump all the way up to 250 milliseconds, we can pretty much guarantee that we're going to get the maximum smoothness and transparency. Now, you can see that I've actually used an infinite ratio, so anything that touches the compression threshold that we've got here will be flattened out, and I'm also limiting the output so that we can't go any louder, which is how we got our compressor to act as a limiter. This means that whatever I do, I can be pretty much sure that I'm not going to get any errant peaks going anywhere. But in order to make sure that that's as smooth as possible, what I've also done is increase our knee size to 24 decibels, which is huge and maybe, once again, a little bit excessive. But because the knee size is so big, it means that anything that's 24 decibels below our compressor threshold is going to just get very, very gently and then increasingly compressed as we go up, which is just going to give us, I guess, a squeezing of things into our louder volumes, but at the same time give us, I guess, a smoothness, because everything is being generated at a ratio that just works its way up. Now, if we aren't careful, then we are going to end up with a real flat sounding mix. So it's important to make sure that our threshold is set just to the point where things are flattened when they get to their absolute loudest. if you look over at this section here, I don't really have any peaks, just the odd peak that's coming up to our threshold. And it's reflected by the fact that here, look, I'm really only compressing 0.3 to 1 decibels. And then as we increase in volume and go more, I've got 1.6, 1.92 as this comes in. And if we jump forward, what you'll see is as our main track comes in with all of our main loudness, we're jumping over this threshold and we are just jumping things down to 3 decibels. So we're, in a sense, getting 3 decibels more volume out of our track. And of course, 3 decibels means that perceptively, this track's almost twice as loud as it could have been if we were just whacking up the fader to 0 decibels. And that makes a big difference. But if we go too much, we're going to end up flattening out all of our track and losing any dynamic range. Transparency is our number one concern when it comes to mastering, and that's why our attack and release are set very smooth as well, so that we get no signs of, I guess, pumping that you would get from the creative perhaps use of a compressor to really drive things. At this point, we just want to be concerned with how loud things sound. Now, the last thing that we need to look at is this anti-aliasing here, AA. Now, when anti-aliasing is turned off, what we're essentially doing is getting our compressor to adjust those peaks of our sound. Now, if that compressor adjusts those peaks as well as it can do on the fly, we're probably going to get a fine sound anyway. But if we allow it to take 64 times as many, I guess, revisions and refinements, we're going to get so much of a smoother plotting of where that compressor squeezes those peaks that we're going to increase once again the transparency of our sound. So all of these things that we're doing, such as pre-compression, anti-aliasing, changing to linear phase, are all just making sure that we don't do anything apart from change our percepted, is that a word? Volume of our track. And once this is all done, all we need to do is make sure that our master fader never approaches or never goes past 0 decibels. So as you can see here, I'm just on 0. What I might want to do is just wind back a tiny bit to maybe, if I hold control or command while I move, just to change a fraction, just so that I can get to perhaps minus 0.1, so that we just make sure that nothing we do is ever going to clip. We're going to get maximum volume out of our track, maximum clarity, and we'll be ready finally to export our track. And that's what we need to look at more or less finally.